Let's hear his analysis of the government's first 100 days in office, the amendment to the National Economic Fund, his long vacation, and more. Don't miss Hot 7's special edition of the Hot Seat, Thursday, November 18th at 8 p.m.
Good evening and welcome to a very exciting edition of the Hot Seat. This is a special edition, and we are sitting with the leader of the opposition this evening. We will go into analysis of the general elections of 2021 and what are the leader of the opposition's thoughts on the government's 100 days in office, and what is the future for this leader of the opposition. Thank you very much for joining me in the Hot Seat.
Great to be here, thank you.
How was vacation?
It's been great. It's only really at the end of it I understood how much I needed it.
Mr. Chastanet, one of the criticisms that has been leveled at our Westminster system of government is that the Prime Minister is essentially king. He's able to appoint ministers, remove ministers. Also, he has the power of dissolving Parliament and calling general elections. What went into your thinking for scheduling the general elections of 2021 in July, on the 26th of July this year?
So the truth be told, the date of the election was actually December 1st. That's why we took a very hands-on approach to dealing with COVID from April. I also clearly understood the impact COVID would have moving forward. And so when the Labour Party did their march in October and we had the outbreak, now let's put things in perspective. When that outbreak happened, remember that was in the context that we'd only had 28 cases and no deaths for the first 5 months, right? And all of a sudden you had 1,000 cases, and then some people died. And so it was shocking. In hindsight, that was really nothing, because remember what happened in January and certainly what has happened even more recently are just pale in comparison. So once we got past the December date, then I was hoping to have done it in the end of January. And sadly, with the outbreak after Christmas, I couldn't do that. And more importantly, one of the conditions to getting the loans that we got from the World Bank and the IMF and from CDB is that there was a draft legislation for the strengthening of our Financial Act. And so we agreed that we would get that passed. And in passing it, one of the provisions, one of the changes of the new act is the luxury of having the budget all the way down in July was no longer an option. So the estimates were to be presented by the end of February, and then the appropriations bill has to be done before March, before the end of March. So all of a sudden, you had this outbreak, and then all of a sudden the realization that we had to put the budget together. So that really prevented us from doing it. There was then an outbreak of COVID in the Ministry of Finance. And luckily we had the state of emergency in play. And one of the provisions that allows you to move the date only by 30 days is a state of emergency. So we were able to move the estimates to the end of March and then move the appropriations bill to the end of April. So certainly couldn't have done it at that point. And then also it's Lent. So I could not have called the elections during the Lent period. So the next thing that really influenced the date was really vaccinations. And we did everything we possibly could to try to get vaccinations to St. Lucia as quickly as possible. And so I gave myself a deadline date of June 30th to make that. So if you work backwards, the elections, the most you could go to would have been October 15th of the year. If in fact you were able to get the vaccinations in July, you would have had 2 to 3 months to help get as many people vaccinated as possible before the elections. So once June 30th had come and the vaccines had not arrived, either from COVID or the attempts that we were making to purchase them, or for the African Union, because we were trying several different ways to get the vaccinations here, they were not. And so therefore we had to proceed. And we knew that once we would have had the elections, it was going to be very difficult to temper people's emotions and enthusiasm and energy to get involved in a campaign. I think as it was, the police and the CMO did a really good job. So when some of the motorcades were getting out of control and they were growing and growing, they put a stop to it. And both political parties, in all fairness, agreed to temper that. But certainly there were meetings taking place in the constituencies, and we all saw what happened post the elections.
Shortly after your announcement of the date of the general elections, Mr. Stephenson King, who is a long-standing member of the United Workers' Party, former leader for the United Workers' Party, former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, made a very bold move that almost seemed to catch the United Workers' Party by surprise. Did you lack intelligence on the ground at the time and you didn't see it coming?
Well, if you remember my presentation the day after, I said this was the worst kept secret in St. Lucia. Right? So, I mean, there were certainly clearly signs from very early of the possibility of something like happening. But I think that all of us gave Steve the benefit of the doubt that he wouldn't go as far as he had gone. So I want to say that, you know, that's certainly his choice. In reading his resignation letter, very much targeted to me, you know, and I wish that he had taken advantage of the many opportunities that we had, including the day before I made the announcement. So the day before I made the announcement of the elections, I met him on the Sunday. We had a long discussion. There were some issues he had, nothing that was insurmountable, but certainly nothing that he referred to in his letter. We were on TV that night, and he was very complimentary to me and to the party and our policies. And then when I made the announcement 2 days later, he resigned. So I want to say that it's certainly within his prerogative to do that. And I have zero difficulties with Steve doing what he did. The part of his resignation that I found the most offensive was then the allegations he made afterwards. And I think that it's very unfair, and it's an indictment against him, that you saying that you suffered in silence for 5 years, that you sat as a senior minister in our cabinet, you sat on my right-hand side in Parliament, you sat on my left-hand side in cabinet, you were given the biggest portfolio, and you weren't given a basket to carry water. The largest allocation in the history of our government was given to the Ministry of Infrastructure. The largest project in HIA Airport, the largest investment in roads, the expansion of his own ministry, the strengthening of his own ministry, labor. I can go down the list of things that Steve was given. And so for him to have gone and then now make allegations about the character of the people in my party and about the party itself is the part that I found the most offensive.
Among many of his complaints, he cited disrespect as his major gripe with the party. How do you respond to that today?
Again, it's a false allegation. Politics is not easy, and I don't want to sit here and belabor the point or get into details, but I can say to you, all of us can interpret things as being disrespectful. So the idea that he in any way was being constrained is grossly false. Let me give you one example. Each minister was allowed to choose his own attaché. Mr. King chose Mark Louis. Now, many of the people in the party found that offensive because Mark Louis was the individual who took the party to court, right? And I can give you many examples of people that he appointed to different positions that the party was not happy with. But I protected Steve because if you're going to have ministers, you have to give them discretion to do that. So we can sit here all day and we can point out to little things that we found that were offensive. At the end of the day, we're all big boys and we're involved in politics, right? So I'm sure whatever he may be considering to be offensive, if he looks at his long life in politics, I'm sure there are many examples, and I certainly have my own examples. But we get past that. And you either suck it up, or you air it out if it's really, really that offensive, and you get it resolved, because that's how you do it in your family, and that's how you do it anywhere else. So, look, as I said, I think that Steve had been with the United Workers' Party for a long time. The party clearly was changing, and I can genuinely understand him saying, maybe this is a direction I don't want to go in. You know, he was our political leader. He was removed as the political leader. We then found reason to remove him as the leader of the opposition as well, and I can understand. And then now a new leader with a very different vision in terms of where we want to go. That's justification enough. And as I said to you, I have zero difficulty with that. It's really the aspersions that he was making on my character, the character of the other members of my party, and of the party itself, that I thought, okay, this is really going too far. And certainly doing it at a time when we had very little opportunity to respond, because when you're saying things in the middle of an election, it becomes even that much more emotional.
Many believe that it was this move that was one of the final nails in your coffin, that is the United Workers' Party. But you, Mr. Chastanet, you said that you were really surprised by the results as related to Leonard Spiderman Toot, Guy Joseph, and Dominic Fede. Did you not feel the shift on the ground? Were your advisors advising you wrong during the general election period?
I take full responsibility. Okay, I'm not passing the blame on to anyone, because ultimately I'm the one who receives the most amount of information. Clearly you would have seen a shift. My experience in politics is there is a national feeling, but you still have to go constituency by constituency. So probably one of the most shocking ones to me is Soufriere. I mean, all of us as politicians have to ask ourselves the question. If the people in Soufriere were not satisfied with what was done, then what does any political party have to do? I mean, the transformation of Soufriere is unbelievable in terms of sporting facilities, roads, water, jobs, everything. I mean, when you go to new development, which was a classic example of a political football, that every political party saw how bad it was. Every political party would promise in opposition that they would fix it. And then when they get into office, they say, well, this was a private development, I can't fix the roads. Okay? Down the road. We came in and dealt with that and got that resolved. I mean, when you walk through new development and you see the upliftment that's taken place there. I mean, and Herod being a young person in his constituency, nobody can accuse him of running away or not being there on a regular basis. So it tells you that there was obviously something much bigger at play. And I can go to Anse-Lorraine. I mean, I can go to Gros-Islet in terms, it's unprecedented, the amount of work that was done in fixing up the Gros-Islet constituency. So some of them were shocking to me. And I think that COVID, and I know everybody's going to blame everything on COVID. So let me phrase that and categorize it properly. COVID is what we call a black swan event. It's an event that now has changed the world, not just St. Lucia, forever. And one of the things globally that you're seeing with COVID is people's individual expectation for now. So you're seeing a huge amount of people not willing to work in America, right? And how people work and their attitude every day has changed. And there's a great saying that we all used to embrace by John F. Kennedy that said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. The meaning behind that and the understanding of that is that if you want to have a very good health system, a great education system, good infrastructure, good security, you have to have a strong government. So even this idea of putting people first, in order to put people first, you have to have a strong government. Okay? But today, people don't have patience. And the idea that I'm going to make a sacrifice for a government, okay, and which many people connote to be politicians, people have now found that to be very offensive. I think that the Black Lives Matter issue, and I think that the Labour Party exploited that extremely well. And I think that probably for a lot of people looking at me and my complexion, my accent, I wasn't born in St. Lucia, I don't speak Creole, all of those things combined with a change in attitude about Black Lives Matter. I'm not telling you everybody in St. Lucia, but some. So there are things that none of them by themselves caused the problem, but together they became a huge shift. Now, I knew it was going to be a tight election, but I honestly thought that we would have been able to pull it off. So some of the losses were very surprising, but I want to say that, because I hear the opposition making the point, I hear other people making the point that somehow I am angry or I'm upset. That's not true. The next day after the elections, I was at my work. Okay? The people of St. Lucia owed me and don't owe United Workers' Party anything. Okay? And I truly believe in the system. Do I believe the system has flaws? Yes, but those flaws apply to both political parties. I benefited in 2016. How can I sit back and now complain about the same system? I think it expresses the will of the people. And I gladly and open-armedly accept the responsibility of the leader of the opposition. Go back to the drawing board and figure out some of the things that we need to do differently. I think communication is one of them. And hopefully we can continue to play our role in the development of our nation. Nation building is not 5 years. Nation building is forever.
The United Workers' Party lost support in key areas, like, for example, Bonte and Rodney Heights, which are traditionally strongholds for the United Workers' Party. What do you think would have contributed to the erosion of support in your strongholds?
I think there's an element in our party that I now really classify them as conservatives. And many people in the past have said, no, these are flabos, right? And these conservatives, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, just classifying who they are. And a conservative is not necessarily a wealthy person, it's just a mindset. These conservatives have shown in the past when they're not happy with things or they're not sure, they don't vote. So it's not that they voted against us, they just didn't vote. So we saw in 1997, those conservatives for the first time voted for Labour. But by 2001, they had already defected. And by 2006, came in and supported Sir John. Those same conservative voters did not vote for us in 2011. And many people attribute that to the elements in our party. Richard Frederick being the primary one. In 2016, they came out and they supported us. And then now, in this last election, only 51% of the voting population came out. So I think that some of them did vote against us, but I think many of them didn't vote.
Let's take on the topic of conservatives. The United Workers' Party underwent a major rebranding after you became the leader of the party. And a lot of the traditional flubos, we're going to just use it in that context, who identify as traditional flubos, seem to be saying that they do not identify the party anymore, the party of Sir John, what they knew it to be, and them being the conservatives who kind of held up the party over the last couple of years. How do you address the rhetoric, Sapa Flabo? It's no longer our party?
I've heard that, but I would say to you the values and the direction of the party was exactly the same as Sir John. Exactly. Just in a more modern thing. It wasn't to say our modern version is better than what he did, it's just reflective of the time. So the idea of building a new St. Lucia was really the emphasis behind the party. So, you know, many people would say the United Workers' Party has always been a nation-building party, and Labour Party has always been one of, Malaway, let me help immediately, right? Social programs, etc. So if you look at the manifesto and the programs of the United Workers' Party, very much nation-building. a globally competitive education system. So it wasn't just about giving people a certificate, but it was about educating them so they can compete on a global basis. Affordable healthcare. The United Workers' Party recognizes universal healthcare doesn't exist. There's no way that this government, in its current form, can afford to provide universal healthcare. So creating a healthcare insurance system of which people who are working will make a contribution, like with NIC, and then the government would provide the insurance free of cost to the persons who are either unemployed or are poor or elderly who don't have the means of making any extra income. The idea of security. We believe regardless of where you live in St. Lucia, everybody should have the same security. Now, the party, and particularly with me at the helm, I'm not an excuse maker. I'm a problem solver. Now, some problems can be resolved overnight, so that's why I said it would take 3 years. And guess what? After 3 years, unemployment level was down to 16% from 25%. We're now producing significant increases in revenue from the government, from when I came in $80 million a month to $110 million a month. We'd spent money on fixing up schools, fixing up roads, fixing up the police stations, getting new equipment, modernizing the whole CTC cameras were around. There was a significant amount of investment, both in human capital and in physical capital, in preparing the country to be able to take off. Combined with the Daher Mall, the upgrading of the airport project, the modernization of the healthcare systems, the West Coast Road, that's almost a $200 million project, the cul-de-sac bridge. All of these things were coming to fruition to really take the country to the next level. That is the traditional way. I think that where the departure comes in is the Compton family. So many people associate Sir John with his family, but all those people who knew Sir John knew that his family was never actively involved in his politics. I think, Lady Janice, and my hat's off to her, I remember seeing her campaigning and helping with the strategy, but in terms of running the country, he is a very separate deal for him. And so the fight that people construed between myself and the Comptons, I have zero ill feeling towards the Comptons. I have the greatest amount of respect for them. People then say, well, how does that translate into the fact with what happened at the National Trust? I was approached by the National Trust, by Allison, the current chairman, to indicate that the trust had gone out to get a new director, and that there were 5 applicants. And the first 2 applicants who were selected, 1 and 2, basically both of them said they weren't going to do the job ultimately because they felt that it was too political. And then the third person that was on the list was Janine. Now, the provisions are that before they offered a job, they're supposed to come to the Prime Minister or the head of the National Trust to get his consent. So you're coming to me after the fact. And then you're taking a young lady who has been publicly critical of me and my party. Now, the relationship with the trust is already contentious, and I welcome that contention. I repeatedly said, everywhere around the world, this is how it is, and I embrace that. But to add fuel to the fire, I felt was going to be the wrong way. And certainly when I looked at her competencies, I didn't think that at this point that she's the best person. Now, people will read into that I have some kind of vendetta against Janine or whatever. Furthest from the truth. And that's why I took the initiative to go and meet with the entire board, as well as the membership. So you put all of these different things together. And again, this is not a criticism, but an observation. The media in St. Lucia did not, in my humble opinion, perform the role that they're supposed to perform. So a lot of fact-checking that should have been done was not done. And so a lot of opinions were allowed to become now facts. And so social media plays a significant role in that, and that many people traditionally see something in writing, and once you see it in writing, in your mind it becomes factual. Social media, there's no fact checking. There are all kinds of people putting out notes there. And I think, and again, that's what I want to say is that there's no one thing by itself. And I'm not upset, I'm not angry at anybody. It is what it is. And I'm saying to you, when we go back and re-look at our party, I think that communications is a critical one. My whole attitude towards Richard Frederick, of where I was not going to publicly get into a spat with Richard. I chose to take it to the courts. I have 3 defamation cases against Richard. None of those cases have been able to make it to hearing because of a technical matter in the courts. And I still think that that was the right way to go, but sadly for me, those issues should have been resolved, and I believe very successful in proving that the allegations that he was making were completely false.
As we go to the break, I just want you to answer briefly for me. Has the rigor of politics affected your family life and your personal life?
After my vacation, I can say yes. You know, the politics, I should say, the governance of the country ended up consuming me. So much so that things I would have normally been able to do, I like to cook, I didn't cook anymore. Spending time with my wife, spending time with my kids, being able to meet my friends and having just casual conversations. The first 3 years of restructuring the government, and I've been through this with companies and other experiences in my life, is necessary, that you become consumed, because you're the visionary, you're the one who has to meet with everybody on a regular basis to hold everybody's hands through this process, because change is difficult. Then came COVID, right? And it was almost like starting all over again. And so yes, it was very, very consuming. And after coming from this vacation, I said, if I ever do return to that position, I have to be able to create those boundaries. And from what I'm doing on the day and in my life, and part of that is, and it was difficult. People say, oh, well, you should have gotten more people to carry more of the weight. But in the beginning, you can't, because they aren't as secure or sure about what that vision is. And it's only through experience and time that everybody now starts getting on the same page. And as I said to you, when we should have been benefiting from the fruits of our labor for the first 3 years, all of a sudden, we had that for 6 months. The next thing we had was COVID.
Thank you for joining us in the hot seat. When we return, we will get more specific about the assessment of performance while in government, the United Workers' Party's assessment while in government, and what is the way forward. Stay tuned.
Yes, catch the first news from 7:15, only on Channel 117. St. Lucia, Hot 7 TV was the first to bring you a full HD newscast. Now, here's another first. The Hot 7 Nightly News is now your first newscast for the evening in St. Lucia. You heard right. The Hot 7 Nightly News is now at 7:15. Yes, tune in at 6:45 p.m. and be the first to catch the latest happenings in your world. On the run, watch us on your cell phone or tablet via the Caribbean Hot FM app. Trusted objective journalism from our diligent news team. Get it fresh, get it hot. The Hot 7 Nightly News, now at 7:15. Watch us on Channel 117 on Flow, Channel 7 Plug and Play, or follow us on Facebook Live on Caribbean Hot 7 TV. Remember when love was in the air? The love of sweet reggae music. Remember Love Fest? Well, Hot FM's Love Fest is back on Hot 7 TV as Love Fest Flashback. Let's go down memory lane as we sing along to our favorite songs. Relive those unforgettable performances, all the all-time greats of reggae music. It's Love Fest Flashback every Thursday at 8 p.m. with a repeat on Sunday, 6 p.m. on the most watched television, the popular Hot FM Love Fest. It's back on Hot 7 TV as Love Fest Flashback. Come, feel the love.
Thank you for staying tuned to the hot seat. In the hot seat this evening is the leader of the opposition, Mr. Alan Chastanet. Mr. Chastanet, one of the things that plagued your administration for the 5 years that it was in office is the allegation of corruption. Well, I should say, are the allegations of corruption, because there were so many allegations of corruption. Can you speak to these allegations, and were they founded? Have you found any proof of any sort of corruption? And moving forward, what will you do to ensure that these allegations do not stick to you and to your party?
So one of the first things that we did, because the reputation of corruption or the allegations of corruption is not unique to any political party or to any politician. All of us, I mean, all around the world, people have lost faith in politicians and politics in general. So that's one of the first things that I did, was to do what's called a governance training. So it was a 4-day course, and it teaches you how to be able to make decisions and to try to create transparency and everything. And also to teach you, as a politician, it's like being a board director. So you're not supposed to get overly involved in the day-to-day operations of any of your ministries. Now, there are times that it may require involvement, but it's not something you should be doing on a consistent basis. So all the ministers, all the permanent secretaries, all the deputy permanent secretaries, chairmen of statutory boards, and executive officers of those boards all participated in the training. It was a 4-day course. And at the end of the course, everybody had to sit in the exam and actually got a certificate, right? The importance of the exam is that I know on that particular day, everybody understood the difference between right and wrong, okay? Anytime that anybody has brought any evidence to me about any situation, I've acted upon it. And there are 2 ministers in my cabinet that I had to take action against, right? And I did so. And I never was in denial. I dealt with it openly. Everybody understood what was going on. Maybe not all the details, but certainly I took the necessary action on moving forward. So the sad reality is that because of COVID again, the decision to fast-track capital projects, the Labour Party was successful in saying that the reason why we did that was because we were trying to benefit ourselves. And I understand how easy that is to turn. And that some people felt, well, the money that you were using to spend the roads should have been monies that you should have been using for social programs and income support. But the reality, that was not money that was available to the state. The money for the roads that we did were monies that were borrowed by the contractors themselves. And it did not count towards the debt to the GDP because it was a direct finance design award. So it's considered to be a recurrent expenditure in our accounting procedures. And where did that space come from? So when we negotiated with the Taiwanese government to borrow the money to be able to do the road projects on the basis of the gas tax, so the $1.50 was being used to pay off that loan. The loan had a 5-year moratorium. So in that 5 years, the only thing we were paying was the interest, but we were not paying the principal. And so it means you're collecting $20 million a year, approximately. $4 million would have gone to the interest payments, and you had $16 million left. If I used the $16 million, that would go very quickly. So what we did is we amortized that $16 million for the next 7 years. And we borrowed the money through the contractors on that. And the justification for it was at least it was creating a massive economic stimulus in the country, creating jobs, and at the end of the day, you actually would have something to show for it. And it is part of the capacity building for the country. We were not successful in communicating that to the public. It was much easier for people to believe that it was based on corruption. And then even when I see Minister King now saying he's going to do an inquiry to me into himself, because this idea that he was the Minister of Infrastructure, that somehow his permanent secretary was bamboozled, is ridiculous, right? And to suggest that other senior ministers in my government were influencing the decisions that were going on is also ridiculous, because that would be an indictment against Mr. King as a senior experienced politician in being able to do that. So these are allegations, and sadly, sometimes, and a lot of times, allegations become factual. And we go back to now what I talked about with the media and the ability, even within the institutions, to trust. So if you have the Auditor General do an audit, does that satisfy people? Okay? So the people's confidence in our entire system isn't there, and so it's very difficult for people to discern fact from fiction.
One of the major points for us as St. Lucians as it relates to corruption, and it's a sore point as well as it relates to the healthcare system. A lot of criticism has been laid at your government because it has been deemed that the healthcare system worsened under your leadership and in your administration. Can you speak to healthcare and corruption? St. Jude's, why don't we have a hospital now?
All very different issues. So let me tackle it from this point. I think it's grossly inaccurate to even suggest that the healthcare system got worse. We opened up OKU. The former government couldn't open it up. And they lied as to why they couldn't open up. They couldn't open up because they had not found a way to finance it. Okay? My government found a way to finance it and open it up. And not only did we end up opening up OKEU, we did not have the benefit of the closure of Victoria, because Victoria now had to remain open. So you mean the cost of operating Victoria remains, and now you had to add the cost of running OKU in the midst of a crisis, where your revenue went from $110 million a month to $60 million a month. Okay? Bonds were being redeemed, and extra cash was having to be set out. You never heard me come to you and complain. We found a way to resolve the issue and make it happen. Healthcare facilities, over 14 healthcare facilities around the island were upgraded and made smart. What does that mean? Generators, extra water tanks, extra refrigeration, security systems. And the purpose of that is because of climate change. At any point where a segment of our society is cut off, there would be the ability to maintain it. So when the PI bridge went and the Soufrière bridge went, was a great example where Soufrière just became isolated. There was a point where the Choc bridge and the Bois de Wange bridge went, and Gros Islet became isolated. So, and there may be even communities become even more isolated during a hurricane period. All those were fixed up. Okay? The process now of introducing a healthcare insurance. If it had not been for COVID, and I know that people could say, oh, that he's using COVID as an excuse, it was real. The blacklisting, people don't even begin to understand the amount of executive time that was taken from the government to deal with that crisis. St. Lucia was successful in getting off the blacklist, and we didn't do it the way that everybody else, most of the other islands did it. The two countries that went on different routes to solve the blacklisting was Barbados and St. Lucia. Everybody else gave up their financial services market. We found a way of creating a territorial tax structure, making those arguments, and getting through that process. So even in terms of the budget, it was huge in making that happen. Many St. Lucians do not appreciate, and I understand that. When we negotiated with the World Bank and the IMF and CDB, the time that it takes to negotiate and satisfy all the requirements, huge. We accomplished all of those things. So healthcare insurance was already very far advanced, but executive time was now transferred to both the blacklisting and now dealing with the COVID crisis. But still, we were now on the verge of introducing a healthcare insurance program with NIC. So the healthcare insurance would have been the quantum leap. Why? It meant that resources that the hospitals and healthcare services needed to be able to provide quality healthcare, they would have had it. Right now, the hospitals and the healthcare centers get an allocation on a quarterly basis. It's not enough money. They're basically covering salaries and utilities. So all the things that you have to pay. But the idea of replenishing equipment, maintaining equipment, look what happened with the MRIs and the X-ray machines, okay? And because government owes so much money to get those suppliers to move, in normal circumstances was difficult, far less in a COVID period where there was demand globally for a lot of different equipment. So I differ from you in that I think that we made substantial inroads in the healthcare system, and it was because of the strengthening of the healthcare system, right, that we were able to handle the COVID outbreak to the extent. St. Lucia was one of the first countries in the Caribbean to have a dedicated respiratory center. We were the ones who had all of the quarantine centers. There was health providers at all of these different places. So I'm very proud of the achievements that we had, and certainly our commitment to the people of St. Lucia of creating an affordable, quality healthcare system. We were well on train to do that. The new government has come in and have basically said, I heard in the House, they don't want to go the idea of a healthcare insurance.
But St. Jude's was promised.
I apologize, yeah.
And to date, we still do not have a hospital.
Absolutely.
How much, in your recollection, has been spent on St. Jude's, and why is St. Jude's still in the state that it's in?
So with St. Jude's, you have to go through a process. You can't just go in when you get into government and say, I'm not going to do this. We didn't come in with the intention of building a new hospital. Okay? It is when the ministers went down and the technical people went down and indicated some of the difficulties with the building. I then brought in a company called FDL, and my confidence in FDL was renewed and strengthened when I spoke to CDB. So CDB, most of their projects around the Caribbean, FDL are the engineers on it. FDL then recruited persons to do an assessment. So FDL, it took around, I think, 8 months for them to come back with the report. They came back with a report and they said, okay, PM, the former government had estimated it would take $80 million to finish the current building. So that's a letter that was written to Kenny Anthony in April of 2016. So this is not invented numbers. Said, we don't think it's going to be. It could be 80 million, and it could possibly be more. So I said, okay, look, I need to move the people from the stadium. So can we downsize and at least get the facility where I could at least bring the minimum thing and reduce the ambition on the hospital, and then we can deal with a new hospital at a later date. They said, sure, but we're going to have to demolish certain aspects of the building, and we have no idea what we're going to find. And then the time that was going to take, and at minimum, it was going to cost you $100 million. Okay? So I said, okay, if I am to close my eyes, and I'm thinking we're going to build a hospital for the first time, what would that hospital look like? And when you go around the world, a hospital is a box. So ideally what you want is all the services within 4 walls. This idea in today's world that you're going to walk outside of a building to get to another building and just being dispersed, which is exactly what the design at at St. Jude's is, you wouldn't do that. So if you're going to just build a structure, how much is that structure really going to cost? So the estimate that was given to me was $100 million that we could build the box, right? And it would probably take another $50 million on top of that to be able to refurbish the box. And I said, if you're going to build the box, how long really is it going to take you to build the box? It felt in 18 months, we could have the hospital up and running. I then went, because I was chairman of CARICOM, to see the hurricane in Turks and Caicos. And so I diverted the plane, long diversion, to Cayman, and went to see the Cayman Health facility there. And I met, the government was kind enough to meet with me and brief my team. I was blown away. You know, the genius is simplicity. And right, the whole process was just so simple. And so we had developed a relationship with the Cayman Health people, and we agreed that they would come in and help advise us on finishing out the property. So we did so. Along came COVID, right? The ability to get steel became more and more difficult, and the project became delayed, but we were trying to fast track it. So what we agreed that we would have done is the building has 2 floors, is that the first floor would be built out the first part, and the services would be moved in there, and then as we now know what services we're going to provide in the future, they will be built out upstairs, which is a common practice around the world. What we had to wait for was we had to wait for the cladding. The cladding was coming from China, right? I don't need to justify what was happening with shipping. And then you had that problem in the Suez Canal where it got blocked for a period of time. it backlogged everything. We're still seeing backlogs. And we were making phone calls and doing everything frantically to be able to get the material here because we were doing the manufacturing in St. Lucia, because we were trying to do as much added value in St. Lucia as possible. So sadly, the project got delayed, but the concept is very good. We've spent $118 million, you heard the Prime Minister, on the project so far. So that is for the foundation, the car park, all of the infrastructure, the cladding, the ceiling of the roof, everything, all of the piping. So the system that they're using there is you have the water pipes on the ground, you have all the electrical outlets on the ground, and inside the building, everything goes in the roof. So you have these trays that hold all the electrical stuff and also your water stuff. So it means that it's an open space. If you want to change the configuration at any time, you just break down the drywall and you can move the stuff. That's the modern way that people are doing hospitals. Now, you can physically go and see the old hospital and see the new hospital and make a determination. Now, fundamentally, people say, why did you make it so big? That's a question, and it's a legitimate question. You are tripling the size of your airport. You're looking to put new hotels in the south. You're expanding the south. And then you're already starting to see migration of people for the first time leaving the north and coming to the south. So you had to anticipate that level of growth. And so the other part was, what you're going to do with the old building. And so the decision on the old building was to recruit a university. So we spoke to Spartan. We've spoken to different people, the people that eventually went to Barbados. All those people we've spoken to about converting that facility into a university. Why? Nobody has a university that's attached to a hospital. And internships and training are a critical component now moving forward. So I think it was a very good design plan. It would have probably taken another $60 million to have finished outfitting the building. It was going to be another 60 days to do that. And those were the meetings that we had. So when I hear the government is going, one, I question the group of people that they've appointed to review it. I mean, Mark Hennicutt has been for the 5 years the greatest adversary on social media and has publicly made his opinions known. How do I have confidence that he's going to go and review it objectively? Okay? John Peters, who's a good friend of mine. I mean, and John and I, when I see some of his articles, I'm not one of these people that just dismiss him because I like John. And I call him up. But the fact is that he has taken a very strong position. He was one of those persons who say, oh, it would take $10 million to go and fix up the hospital. Well, I want to see. Now they have the opportunity. They want to go back into the other building, which I think is asinine. Let me see how much money it's going to cost and how long it's going to take to retrofit that building in order to be able to accommodate the people from the stadium.
The behavior outside of the House on Tuesday, when you returned to the House since the general elections of July 26, broke all COVID protocol, and you have been heavily criticized for patronizing the behavior, especially after the spike that we saw after the general elections. How do you respond?
You know, let's start from the back part. So when I went to the House and we were going to debate the bill on the economic fund, the Prime Minister stood up and threatened me, right? And basically said, if we chose to debate this bill and to bring up the idea that it's a sovereign fund to a slush fund, we're going to be here until midnight, right? Because he's going to be exposing me and my former government on all our things. So I said to him, you're threatening me? Really? In public, the leader of the opposition? And then in the middle of the debate, Ernest Hilaire stands up on a point of order and says to the speaker, I don't believe that the member is making any sense, and I think that he should be asked to stop and desist. When I went to do the debate, I would have preferred if I would have actually heard from the Minister of CIP before I had my debate. But he stood there because he's the leader of government business, and he said, if you don't speak, we're going to close the debate. Okay? Now, the absurdity of that is how many voices does the opposition have in the House? Two. Okay? So when I hear these allegations being made about the breaches in protocol and everything else, so all the labor people that were on the other corner, they weren't in breach of the protocols? Okay? That the allegations and the accusations about me, and that I have no support and I'm not loved in the country and this and that, I'm a washed up politician, and people felt strong enough to come out to support me. And this idea that under our administration we had barriers because we were trying to prevent democracy. No, we were trying to enforce the protocols. So in the absence of the barriers, people were not allowed into the compound of the parliament, were they? They were on the Valmont side of the road. They were in Constitution Park. So they were invisible barriers. Yeah? And the policemen were there to enforce as much as they could whatever the protocols were. Where was their concern when they did the march in October? Where was their concern when they did the motorcade around the island? And in many ways, St. Lucian's attitude towards COVID today is at the feet of the Labour Party, who argued that I can't breathe, that you're taking away my civil liberties, you're doing all of these different things. They came into government, they expunged people's records, and what happened? Massive outbreak. And it continued. So if you came in and you knew that because of elections, that there was the high potential of a breakout, what you should have been doing is reducing people's activity as much as possible. So even this absurdity now of curfew versus confinement, not having a state of emergency. Here you have a very well-established prime minister in Trinidad. When he did the interview and he said, I'm ending the state of emergency at the end of November, the media asked him what's going to happen to the curfew. He says, you cannot have a curfew without a state of emergency. And when you understand the rationale for that, because if you are going to be taking away people's civil liberties, it has to be under special circumstances. It can't be just under ordinary circumstances. The United Workers' Party government are the ones who designed and drafted the COVID bill. The COVID bill is the Health Act as well as the Quarantine Act combined but modernized. And we said from the beginning, it cannot give permission for a curfew. So what did they do? They changed it from a curfew to confinement. Confinement in the COVID Act is where the CMO can make recommendations that if you are tested positive, that you have to remain in quarantine. If on contact tracing, that we believe that you're at high risk, we can cause you to be quarantined. If in fact you come from a country in which there is high exposure, we can say that you need to be quarantined before you come into the population. But confinement is not a curfew, right? So the hypocrisy, the double standard of the Labour Party and some of their supporters, I mean, people in St. Lucia are learning more and more. And as I said, there's an old Indian proverb. It says, when you talk, I listen. When you do, I learn. So when they were in opposition, they talked, made all kinds of promises. $1,500, going to reduce and pay back people's tax bills, etc. Now they're coming into office, they say, oh, the country's broke. Wasn't that exactly what I said? Did I not say that? Repeatedly? And I was accused of saying, oh, how can the country be broke? The country is broke financially. And even if you're going to put people first, you have to have a strong government. So first is you have to fix it. So there's some subtleties in this whole thing that the average person, I'm not demeaning the average person, so I'm not saying anything bad or derogatory about anybody. So let's take the Economic Fund as a classic example, if I can. The amendments that they've made to it, in essence, created a catch-all. So you can draw down monies for A, B, C, D, and E. E was amended, which said a cabinet approval that's non-recurrent in nature. When you take out non-recurrent in nature and you say a project that is approved by cabinet, we call that a catch-all. It means that anything that applies to. The purpose of the fund is to be an asset to the state. When the fund lends money, the monies remain an asset. If you use the money for recurrent expenditure, it becomes a cost, and it depletes the value of the fund. How is that St. Lucia, who is in desperate need to borrow money to make up the shortfall that we have, going to convince financial institutions to lend them the money when they don't even have a reserve? You can't even practice the fiscal discipline of showing that you're trying to reserve money. But you see, the need to be able to satisfy everybody individually, which I understand and I know the pain. I'm a representative of a constituency that has very poor people in it. Yeah? But you're going to do them the greatest injustice when you weaken the position of the government to help them. And that is really the fundamental difference between the United Workers' Party and the Labour Party.
The action of the Speaker of the House to withhold your remuneration has been deemed by some as unwarranted and unreasonable, but by others as commendable, and that the Speaker is making an example for future actions. What are your thoughts on this?
So first of all, I have the greatest amount of respect for Parliament, and at no point was I making any statements by not appearing in Parliament. Secondly, I accept that the Speaker of the House is the leader of Parliament, and I respect his opinion. It was my assumption after reading the standing orders that what I was supposed to do, in order not to be in jeopardy of missing 6 consecutive meetings. So if you miss 6 consecutive meetings without an excuse, then you're deemed to have left your seat. Immediately on getting notices that Parliament was going to be called, I sent in a note to the Parliament Secretary, who is the Secretary to the Speaker, so it's not I had any problems in sending them. That's the proper format to do, indicating I was out of the country, out of state. The note was acknowledged. On 2 occasions I did speak to the Speaker. I did that each time. On no occasion was I told that my excuse was inadequate. So the first time I heard that the Speaker was making a determination as to whether he was going to accept my reason was like everybody else in St. Lucia. And you know, I would like to think that if I was doing something wrong that I would have been informed about it earlier, but that's his prerogative. So at the end of the day, he's made a decision, and let me see how it goes through. But I certainly know that the persons that put me in the House were the constituents of Micoud South. I do know, and I understand what he was saying, is that your salary as a constituent is only transferred to you once you're sworn in. But then it's made retroactive to the day of the election. So does it mean if I only get sworn in on the third meeting, then it's just made retroactive back to the same day? You're still going to get the same level of pay. I'm not so sure it's within his prerogative or its control to be able to do that. So the issue is am I being penalized because I didn't show up, or am I being penalized because I've not sworn in? And it was really an administrative issue. And certainly the salary of the leader of the opposition is clearly outside of the perusal of the Parliament. My good friend Stevenson King was complaining that there was no vote in Parliament for the leader of the opposition. It is not for Parliament to vote on who the leader of the opposition is. It's the appointment by the Governor General. Okay, so I'm not so sure that they can withhold it. But look, I think that he expressed himself. As you know, I sat with the greatest amount of respect. He and I spoke afterwards. And so I wait for what his final decision is. And as I said, whatever he's going to say, I will then decide how I react to it at that point.
And finally, from us, you have expressed concern about your tenure, and you have expressed as well that you will give a final decision about your service as leader of the opposition. Can we expect that you are going to serve as leader of the opposition for the next 5 years until the next general election?
Well, 5 years is a long time. Let me say this to you, that what I did not want to do is to make the same mistake I've seen many other leaders do. That on the eve of election or the morning of election, in the heat of all the emotions, that you rush out and make a decision, and then you see people retracting on that decision. So in speaking to my party, I did offer my resignation because I felt it was the right thing to do. The party chose not to accept my resignation. That doesn't mean that the party has made a final decision on whether I'll be the leader into the next elections. That's a completely different issue, and we'll get to that at this convention, the following convention, or the following convention. We have lots of time to make that decision. What I wanted to do was to go away, spend time with my wife, spend time with my children, things that I have ignored over the last 8 years, to address some of those issues. I also met a group of individuals who I've known who are starting an equity fund. They've raised $500 million so far. They're in the process of raising $750 million. And I've been doing some consultancy work with them. I feel that the Caribbean needs equity, and I think being able to bring what I call North American institutional money into the Caribbean is long overdue. And so to be part of that is very huge. Because of that, I've traveled to Puerto Rico, to the USVI, to the Dominican Republic, to Jamaica, and to the Bahamas. And certainly those travels over there said to me, boy, St. Lucia needs to get its act together. Those persons who believe that the plans of the United Workers' Party were overambitious need to wake up. Those plans would have only just kept us on an even pace. What Jamaica and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and the USVI and the Bahamas are doing is remarkable. Yeah? So I wanted to refresh myself, rethink everything in an unemotional state, because you had to be affected. Yeah? I'm only human like everybody else. And it was important because before I can offer myself, I must be prepared to offer myself. So I've certainly told my party right now that for the foreseeable future, I'm very happy to continue as the political leader, and as such remain as the leader of the opposition. I do intend to attend as many, if not all, of the parliamentary meetings. I could never say every one of them, but certainly by far the majority of meetings that are taking place. We have our office open, and I intend to give this the seriousness that it deserves. In terms of past a certain point, I think once the party has reviewed itself, there's a report that's taking place, and people have accepted and digested what has transferred. How much of that was due to Alan Chastanet? Okay? Is Alan Chastanet the best person to lead the United Workers' Party into the future? Those are the questions that have to be answered. And the great thing about me is I'm not one of these politicians that's hungry to be the leader or to be Prime Minister. I'm honored to have been the Prime Minister of St. Lucia, but it's not something that I believe that anybody owes to me. And I certainly would only want to retain the position if in fact I think that we can continue the journey of building a new St. Lucia. So even the plans of the party of building a new St. Lucia, how we conducted ourselves, all have to be under review. And once we understand where we're going to go, the party will select the best person for the job. But I think that that's in a couple of years. But certainly, I really at the service of the people of my party and ultimately the service of the people of this country.
Thank you for joining us in this special edition of The Hot Seat. And thank you for tuning in yet again to The Hot Seat. Please tune in next time for another exciting edition of The Hot Seat with me, Crystal Riviere. Good night.
The Hot Seat is now too hot to premiere on the weekend. That's why from now